Hello, welcome back to Fred in the Shed. I'm up in the Radio Shack. One of the questions that come up quite often on my videos concerns shortwave radio. And people will ask me, Fred, in 2023, is it worth getting into shortwave radio? It's not really an easy question to answer in 2023 because if we're completely honest about it, shortwave had its peak, had its day quite a long time ago, and nowadays it's certainly seen as a bit of an old man or old woman's hobby. The internet hasn't done it any favours because, let's be honest about it, any radio station around the world that you might want to listen to is now available free on the internet. But it hasn't completely killed shortwave, and I made a video about a year ago which was quite poignant, and that was when the problem kicked off with Russia and the Ukraine that's still going on, and Russia tried to stop, well they did stop the BBC transmitting. They blew up the receiving tower, the television tower, so the BBC reverted back to shortwave, and I made a video on that, and it was actually quite popular how shortwave suddenly become very, very important because it's very difficult to block shortwave radio signals. And of course it's the same thing if your beloved internet goes down. I mean, you see people panic now when they can't get a signal on their phone. It's like the end of the world. Well, if the internet goes down, you can't get news on your phone. Nothing. Your TV is a smart TV. We haven't used a TV antenna for years, and if we did, it's a digital signal. So if the internet goes down or your power network goes down, how do you get news? It's back to radio, isn't it? And I've said this before, that's why I think it's really important that everyone should have at least one little cheap AM medium wave radio at home. Just if it really does hit the fan, and you just never know, that's the only way you're going to get news. But you've got to be completely honest about it. Shortwave as a communication media, it has had its day. And it's only really going to appeal to people that are still intrigued and have a passion about radio communication. I remember being a kid about 10 years old, and I swapped in the playground something for this radio cassette player, a mono version. It was a Sanyo, and it was well beat up, and the cassette player didn't work. And that's why I sort of got it as a swap, really. I tried to fix it, but I couldn't. But it did have a radio, and the telescopic antenna was broken. It was pretty beat up. So I wrapped a piece of wire around the telescopic antenna, trying to pick up FM to get the top 40 and things like that. And I remember it had SW on the dial, which of course was shortwave. I didn't know what it meant. But I do remember that in the evenings, it was picking up all sorts of radio programmes. And I realised I was picking up these stations from all around the world. I remember South Africa coming in. That was when the apartheid was there. And I suppose it was Mandela speeches and things. I was picking up this stuff that you just didn't get on the BBC. And it fascinated me then that just basically a piece of wire strung out of my bedroom window could pick up radio stations thousands and thousands of miles away. And even now, I'm a damn sight older, but even now, it still fascinates me how a piece of wire, you can just string this down the bottom of your garden and it will resonate, and the radio will decode it. And you can still, even in 2023, you can pick up radio stations thousands and thousands of miles away on shortwave. It still fascinates me. I still think it's a great medium. It's kind of sad, but I have noticed over more recent years the amount of English-speaking shortwave radio stations have reduced. There is Radio China, of course. I think they're the biggest. I mean, they transmit massive power right across the globe. You can get those just on a telescopic little whip on a radio. So whereas the internet has, in a way, effectively finished shortwave radio as a communication media, it has improved the hobby for the enthusiast, because now when you're tuning on your radio and you pick up a distant station, it's quite easy to go onto the internet, type in Google, find that station. It will tell you how far, how distant that is from your location. It'll also give you a little bit of background on the station. Sometimes they show the transmitting mast, and I think it's really interesting that you can reference that so quickly, and it's amazing sometimes the how far the distance is that you're receiving. It's almost like the hobby of shortwave has had a new breath of life with the internet. Inevitably, when people say, Fred, I'm interested in shortwave, what radio would you recommend to get into the hobby? That is really difficult to answer in 2023. The good news is that the mass producer of radios is China these days, and China have really held on to shortwave radio. It's still obviously very popular over in China. In the West here, we've all gone over to DAB now, haven't we, and internet radio. But in China, even these Reticast radios that I quite often review, even on a basic radio like this, probably a £20 radio, it's still got the broadcast shortwave band, which I think is absolutely amazing, and they work pretty well. So it's quite surprising what you can pick up on a cheap radio. Of course, technology's moved on, and we now have SDR, software defined radio. I've just got some examples here. We've got this little Malahite radio here that comes with a screen. This can also pick up ham radio and the likes. And then we've got these two little examples here, which I often show on my channel. Again, they're imitations of shortwave radio. It's software, but it does work. You can, but for the dedicated shortwave radio listener, these probably are not where you want to start. Then we have the little SDR dongles. And again, these are amazing. I mean, I've been spending a lot of time recently looking at these radios. Something like this is about £17 to £20. And if you get the right software, I did find it was a little bit tricky, but if you get the right software, that can work exceptionally well. And my favourite is this little Nuilec dongle, about £35, incredibly sensitive on shortwave. Only problem is with these little dongles, these SDRs, is that they're so wide. I mean, they are a wide scanner. They'll do all of the shortwave band, and they'll go right up into the UHF and VHF frequencies. Not that I don't think there's a great deal to listen to up there, but I found that because I have a transmitting tower, an AM transmitting tower, a lot of those have been switched off now, but I've got one fairly close, and it can cause problem with harmonics and ghost radio stations. So these, and also they take a little bit of time to get working. If you like fiddling with computers, then yeah. What I would say, if you're going to buy a radio, my experience, you can get these very, very cheap ones on eBay, and I guess on Amazon, typically £10 to £15. I'm going to say avoid these, to be honest. They're good on medium wave and they're good on FM, but the short wave, even though this one's got all of the bands that you can see here, the tuning is very, very sort of blunt. It's there's no fine tuning to the control. It's very difficult, and I think you're going to find that not very rewarding. So I would say avoid the very cheap radios. Little Reticast radio here, very nice receiver, very good audio. What lets this radio down, and you're going to find this with a lot of cheap ones, is it's digital tuning only. There's no tuning dial manual. It's up and down. It's scan, self-tuning. That really is a no-no on shortwave. You do need a tuning knob, a VFO, an encoder. Now, even with the more modern radios, this is quite a nice shortwave radio, again from Reticast, and you have got a nice VFO, a nice tuning decoder. It is quite smooth, but the technology inside the radio is, again, it's SDR. So this is not an analog decoder. It does step slightly. It's not a big issue, especially if you're going after just shortwave broadcast band, you'll find it absolutely fine. If you really did want to go for some of the distant stations, and again, it's got no fine tune, and you'll find that it does slightly chuff because it is a digital receiver. This other radio is the same. If you wanted an old-fashioned analog, a variable capacitor tuner, it might be worth taking a chance and getting an older second-hand radio. I picked up this Seishu SW5000. I was really lucky. I saw this in a charity shop window, and that's becoming quite rare because in the UK, charity shops just sell women's clothes and shoes. Even the one I bought this from has stopped selling electrical goods. But this was only, I believe, £20. And it's a very, very fine radio. It's been well looked after. It has a BFO pitch control. It has an RF gain. And the tuning is really, really sensitive. Yeah, once again, I said it's going to be a digital tuner because it's PLL. It's not an analog tuner, but it is very, very sensitive. It is very, very fine. Certainly worth looking at a second-hand radio. I mean, you don't want to spend too much money. Texan, for example, I haven't got it here. I've got a Texan P600 and I do the 660. These are really, really nice. Really, really nice radios. Yeah, you get to hold their price, but again, on eBay, I'm taking off the top of my head, you probably pick one up for maybe £60, £70. I think they're definitely worth the money. Of course, any radio is only going to be as good as its antenna. Now, all of these radios come with telescopic whip antennas. This one's particularly long, and they'll pick up the broadcast band no problem. Even this will pick up ham bands. But really, what you want is a long wire. I mean, this is the beauty of shortwave. It's so easy the way it works. Literally, this is a single core wire, and if you cut off 20 meters, something like that, and you just stretch this out of a window along your garden, or you could even, if you've, like, for example, in my loft here, you could just run it around the perimeter of your loft. It'll work surprisingly well. It does help if your radio comes with a antenna input. The more expensive Texan radios have that. I believe this one on the back somewhere. Yeah, this one has an antenna input. That makes things a little bit easier. But this will work absolutely fine, and that's just the magic of radio propagation and shortwave radio. If you haven't got an antenna input, there's no problem. Just strip the wire and literally just wrap it around the antenna, and that'll work absolutely fine. If you want to get serious and you certainly want to go after, say, the ham bands and things like that, you should really fit a balun on the end of your wire. Now, I've been learning quite a lot about this recently. They tell me a 49:1 balun would reduce down this wire here. That will give it the impedance of about 50 ohms, which is what your radio is going to look for. That will tune the wire certainly more into the ham bands. If you're going to get split lower sideband, upper sideband, you've got a BFO control. Yeah, maybe you want to invest in a balun, but do a bit more research on that because I'm still learning. Of course, it's possible you can still spend more money. One of the better radios that I haven't got myself, I always wanted, I believe it was the Texan 2000, nice big size radio. They're quite expensive now. I think they may have stopped making it, but they come up on eBay. They generally are looked after. And there's other second-hand radios that you often see in the shack here. I'll just zoom in a little bit. Bear with me. There we go. This is my Yaesu FRG 8800. And we'll have a play with this in a second just to finish the video out. It's a radio from its day. I'll be completely honest with you. Something like a modern Texan radio or even one of these little dongles, it will outperform this radio. But it's just a nice radio to use. And maybe it's me, I'm old-fashioned. I like sort of turning knobs, and I like proper buttons, things like that. And when you are tuning a radio, let's be honest about it, it's nice to get your hands on a great big knob. Okay, that sounded a bit wrong, didn't it? No, I won't edit it. I won't edit that out. And if Mrs. Fred ever watched my video, she would probably disagree with me. It's nice to get your hands on a nice VFO, isn't it? A manual tuning knob. Yeah, that sounds a little bit better. It really is. But I mean, these they are getting a bit old now. A lot of these would need servicing. You probably would have to send it away and get the capacitors changed. I haven't done that on this one. And other than the VHF side of it, it still seems to work surprisingly well. So I've left it alone. But again, you can pick these up for a couple of £100, but they might need sort of servicing. My conclusion to the end of all of this waffle, and thanks for sticking with it, by the way, is it worth getting a shortwave radio in 2023? Yeah, I say it is. I really do. I think if you've got any interest in radio at all, I think for what they cost, get yourself one of these cheap little China radios that's got the shortwave broadcast band, piece of wire wrapped around the antenna, stuck out of a window. You'll be surprised what it will pick up, and I think it's an interesting hobby. It still fascinates me to this day how you can sit here and listen to a radio station that's thousands of miles away. So I say, yeah, definitely worth it. Okay, right, I'm going to have a little twiddle about on the Yaesu and I'll play the video out. But for now, I'll say cheers. Thank you very much for tuning in, listening to my waffle. I know I probably bore a lot of you, but thanks anyway. Just take a second, just give me the thumbs up down below before you go. I'd appreciate that. But anyway, here comes some shortwave recorded in the UK on a Sunday on my Yaesu FRG 8800 Froggy radio. Cheers, guys. Here it comes.
Leur parent était toujours au travail. Il portait la trappe attachée au cou pour qu'il ne la perde. Voici donc comment le titre d'une chanson peut renvoyer à un espace à une période historique très précise.
With the squeeze behind his forwards, it leaves Mudrick free. Mudrick against Stones on that occasion. Leaves him for dead with pace, and then he's in. There he goes. Yeah, it's a clear offside. I think they get that absolutely right. So far before Mudryk.
Yes.
So I think to me it certainly the remarks coming from the representative of the White House clearly demonstrated disappointed, and yes, the United States is disappointed that the meeting in Moscow turned out to be different to what they perhaps expected it to be.
But then, Professor Jones, isn't the Ukraine issue really, in the end, it is an issue between Russia?
Ta hanyar gudanar da salloli da karatu alkur'ani mai tsarki a cikin masallatai domin roƙon Allah alherin da ke cikin watan Ramadan domin neman gafara tsaro da
Tango 3 X-ray contest. Mike 6 Tokyo, Kilo 592212.
One more time. 5, one more time. Echo Alpha 1 X-ray, Echo America 1 X-ray contest. Germany 0, Mike Tango November 59131. Echo Alpha 1 X-ray, Echo America 1 X-ray contest. Echo Alpha 1 X-ray, Echo America 1 X-ray contest. Echo Alpha 1 X-ray, Echo America 1 X-ray contest.
You 591, 5 Golf 0 Mike Tango November. Just a minute. Some problem. Go.
بليزة لو كل ولين كبليزة.
قلت له كيف مشي هي؟ راضي للربع زيدين الربع تستيج عربي راضي للربع زيدين الربع.
Expression pour retrouver son chemin et c'est plutôt pratique. Je suis enfin arrivé à rentrer chez moi pour la petite anecdote. Et malgré tout, une petite révision s'impose.